What is the single biggest difference between good poker players and great poker players? Well, keep watching as we go over some hands from some of the all-time greats such as Daniel Negreanu and Phil Ivey to see exactly what makes that big difference in becoming one of the all-time greats.
Cool.
Daniel's in with ace-4 of clubs.
Daniel's starting off with the best of it like we would expect, but heads up, things can get a little weird.
So here we're heads up between Phil Ivey and Daniel Negreanu. Ivey decides to raise the button with 9-6 off, fairly standard play, and D-Negs ends up calling with the ace-4 suited. And I don't mind this play, but sometimes you like to see a 3-bet in that spot from Daniel Negreanu.
And Daniel check raises.
And I don't think this is really a bluff. I think he knows he's raising with the best hand.
Phil calls.
That is a weird float. Phil's probably got a trick or two up his sleeve.
The flop comes 3 Queen Queen rainbow. D-Negs checks and Ivey decides to bet. But we then see Negreanu go for the check raise in this spot, which to me it just looks as though he's trying to win the pot there and then and take it down, as a lot of the time he's going to have the best hand with the ace high. But Ivey weirdly decides to float here with the 9-6, which is a strange play, but Ivey being Ivey would have had some sort of strategy where he was going to plan on bluffing the turn or the river. However, the turn ends up coming the 6 of hearts and Ivey ends up hitting a lucky card here, and so he makes the 2 pair.
Peel a 6, I guess.
Daniel now checks.
Phil's going to be pretty confident he's got the best hand since Daniel would probably never actually raise a queen.
Phil bets. Roughly half pot.
If Daniel calls here, he's probably prepared to call river too.
Ivey decides to continue betting on the turn and faces a call from Negreanu. So the river ends up coming the 8 of hearts. And in this spot, you'll see a lot of players online tending to check this one back. There's obviously the flush draw, which calls the turn and gets there. They could have the 8, a higher pocket pair, or possibly the trip queens. However, Ivey's probably thinking, would Daniel check raise the flop here? If he hit the queen, probably no, he's probably more likely to call in this spot. And so he'll be thinking, what would Daniel have done this with here? He'd have probably done it with an ace high, a king high, something like that. And so Ivey decides to go for a bet on the river of just under half pot. And I really like this play from Ivey here because Daniel's probably thinking, well, Ivey's capable of pulling off these sort of bluffs. So ace high could actually be good in this spot. And so he does end up making the call and Phil turns over the 6. So what am I trying to get at here? Well, the main thing which distinguishes good players from great players is their ability to make great value bets and in particular thin value bets. So before we take a look at an absolutely insane hand by Sam Greenwood, let's quickly take a look at what thin value actually means. So essentially, thin value is where you might only be ahead, say 60% of the time, 70% of the time, but as more of the time than not you're going to be ahead, it's still a spot in which you want to bet and get some thin value. And the key here is to be able to recognise exactly what your opponents might have and exactly what you might get a call from, which is worse than your hand. And some may say that this hand from Ivey wasn't necessarily a really thin value bet, so we're going to take a look at another hand from a recent huge 100k buy-in event on Party Poker from Sam Greenwood, who is another top player, and you'll always see him playing on these big online events on Party Poker and GG Poker at the moment.
Yeah, Antonio down in 15th now. That's like, who would have thought that a few years ago that he would be overtaken by so many players. Such is the state in the seems like the bulletproofness, if that could be a word, of the super high roller world. They keep going. The money keeps turning up. Don't know how, don't know where from, but these things keep going. Laszlo with 3-bet from the small evergreen with button open. And like you say, Henry, look, Laszlo's one of your boys, right? You're rooting him on. That's what we like to see. He's in here.
He's just stepping out strong, you know.
So Greenwood raises with 5-7 suited on the button, gets 3-bet out of the small blind by Laszlo, and then Greenwood ends up calling, which is a fairly standard play.
Omaha events, you just love to see it.
But Henry, this board...
Yeah.
Right. And he's kind of going to go barreling if he does hit one of the good cards for Greenwood, right?
So Laszlo, being the pre-flop aggressor, decides to c-bet here. And of course, Greenwood ends up making a call here. He's got the flush draw, he's got the straight draw. He couldn't get a much better flop than that. And the turn comes a brick, which is a 6 of clubs. And Laszlo decides to check it over, and then it gets checked back by Sam Greenwood.
Like a pretty fast check, I think. Was that slipped over here to Greenwood?
Yeah, it does face the check second time over. Oh, finds the filthy little 7 on the end. The non-drama way of getting there.
So the river ends up coming the 7 of clubs, and Greenwood ends up making a pair on the river, and Laszlo again just decides to check it over. He thinks his ace high might be good in this situation, which a lot of the time it will be. And again, you'll see a lot of players just checking this one back in a 3-bet pot and taking it down. But Greenwood, being a top player, recognises that if Laszlo had the overpair in this situation, he'd almost certainly be betting. And so he's most likely got a hand like ace king, ace queen, ace jack, or the ace 10, which he does have. And so he not only decides to bet, but he decides to go for a value shove in this situation, which is just a great play by Greenwood, as it looks as though he might have just missed and he's trying to steal the pot with a big bet and hope to get a call off an ace high from Laszlo.
It wouldn't shock me, but it'd just be pretty next level. And target this exact type of hand, ace queen, ace king. Wow, it just goes for the over. This is so sick. So sick. How do you value jam a 7 here?
Damn, that's pretty sweet. That's just fun to see. I mean, yeah, that's just like, I gotta say, a lot of my, I like to usually predict and guess what things are happening, but there's been a lot of there's been some stuff happening today, like a lot of different sizings and spots where I'm just kind of like, wow, there's a really difference in what we're doing. I mean, this seems a bit unconventional, but I love it. I mean, it makes sense. Just kind of.
But in the end, Laszlo does just end up making the fold and Greenwood takes it down. But this hand is just such a great example of how the great players are so good at maximising the value they can get from their hands and making thin value bets on the river where a lot of people might just check it back. Now that you've watched some clips of some of the best poker players in the world, click that video on the screen now to see someone who might not be quite as good as they claim to be at poker.